After surviving a near-fatal attack by poachers that left her with permanent scars, Ranger Olivia Reed had dedicated her life to protecting the wilderness she once feared. But nothing in her training prepared her for what would happen when an injured police K9 appeared at her station during the worst wildfire season in decades. The dog's desperate determination would lead Olivia deep into unmarked territory, to a hidden cabin harboring secrets that would challenge everything she believed about the forest she'd sworn to protect, and about her own capacity for courage, when faced with a truth that had remained buried for 15 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The radio crackled with static before the dispatcher's voice cut through. Eastridge Tower, this is base. Smoke reported 3 miles southeast of your position. Confirm visual. Ranger Olivia Reed raised her binoculars, scanning the dense tree line where Blackwater Forest met the steeper terrain of the Cascade Mountains. A faint grey plume rose lazily against the azure sky, barely visible but unmistakable to her trained eye. Base, this is Eastridge. Visual confirmed. Looks small, probably illegal campfire. I'll check it out. Copy that, Eastridge. Approach with caution. Fire danger is extreme today. Olivia lowered the binoculars, her gloved hand instinctively rising to the ridged scar that ran from her left temple to her jawline. 5 years as a wilderness ranger had taught her that approach with caution was more than protocol. It was survival. At 34, Olivia had spent more time in isolation than most people experience in a lifetime. The remote fire tower perched atop Eastridge Peak was considered a hardship post by the Forestry Service. 6 months of solitude, broken only by radio check-ins and occasional supply runs. For most rangers, it was a temporary assignment, something to endure before returning to more sociable postings. For Olivia, it was home. She packed efficiently, years of practice evident in her precise movements. Water, first aid kit, emergency rations, satellite phone, fire extinguisher, service weapon. The weight of the backpack settled comfortably against her shoulders as she descended the tower's spiral staircase and stepped into the parched summer heat. The drought had transformed Blackwater Forest from lush sanctuary to tinderbox. Every step rustled through undergrowth that should have been green and vibrant, but now crackled with brittle dryness. Olivia moved with deliberate care, each footfall placed to minimize noise and disturbance. 3 miles southeast would take her to the edge of what rangers called the Deadfall Basin, a remote depression formed decades ago by a landslide that had created a natural bowl in the landscape. It was off the marked trails, rarely visited even before the drought had closed portions of the forest to recreational hikers. As she hiked, Olivia mentally catalogued the surrounding flora. The drought-stressed ponderosa pines, their needles, shifting from green to yellow, the dormant undergrowth waiting for rain, the exposed roots of ancient trees clinging to increasingly dry soil. She knew this forest better than she knew any human being, could read its subtle changes like a doctor monitoring vital signs. The forest was suffering, and Olivia felt each symptom personally. Before joining the Forestry Service, she had been a promising environmental lawyer in Seattle, specializing in cases against corporate polluters. That career had ended abruptly when she led a case against Northland Timber, one of the largest logging operations in the Pacific Northwest. What should have been a straightforward lawsuit over clear-cutting and protected watersheds had turned dangerous when she discovered evidence of toxic waste dumping. The accident that followed, brake lines cut on a winding mountain road, was never officially linked to Northland. The investigation concluded with frustrating ambiguity, citing mechanical failure as the likely cause. But Olivia knew better. The same night she was discharged from the hospital, her apartment was broken into, her case file stolen. The message was clear: Back off, or next time you won't survive. So she had retreated, not out of fear, but strategic necessity. If she couldn't fight for the wilderness through legal channels, she would protect it directly. The physical scars from the crash had healed, leaving only the visible reminder on her face. The psychological wounds ran deeper, manifesting in her preference for solitude and hypervigilance that made urban environments nearly unbearable. Blackwater Forest had offered sanctuary. Here, danger announced itself honestly, in gathering. Storm clouds in tracks of predators, in the warning rattle of disturbed snakes. Nothing like the hidden threats of human civilization. The smoke grew more visible as Olivia approached the basin's edge. She paused, scanning the terrain below. The depression created its own microclimate, often trapping cooler air overnight. This sometimes resulted in morning fog, but today the basin was clear, allowing her to spot the thin column of smoke rising from somewhere near its center. No designated campgrounds existed in this area, and the fire ban had been in effect for weeks. Either someone was ignorant of the regulations or deliberately ignoring them. Neither possibility improved her mood. A single spark in these conditions could ignite a catastrophe. Olivia adjusted her path to approach from downwind, keeping the rising smoke in view. As she descended into the basin, the temperature dropped noticeably, a small mercy in the relentless summer heat. The terrain grew more challenging. Deadfall logs created natural barriers, forcing her to climb over or detour around massive fallen trunks. The forest floor here was a study in contradiction, bone dry on the surface, but with patches of surprising moisture in shadowed hollows where sunlight never reached. Fungi thrived in these protected pockets, white mycelium threads spreading beneath the surface in vast networks invisible to casual observers. Like so much in nature, the real story lay beneath what humans bothered to notice. Olivia paused, water bottle halfway to her lips. Something had changed in the quality of light filtering through the canopy. The smoke plume had thickened, suggesting a fire growing rather than dying out. She quickened her pace, concern mounting. 20 minutes later, she reached the approximate location where she'd estimated the smoke originated. But instead of an illegal campfire, she found a small clearing with the charred remains of what appeared to be a deliberate burn. Scientific equipment lay scattered around. Soil sampling tools, specimen containers, a damaged tablet computer. This wasn't recreational campers or careless hikers. This looked like a research site, and one that had been deliberately sabotaged. Olivia knelt to examine one of the specimen containers. The label was partially burned, but she could make out an official-looking code and what might have been university credentials. She photographed everything with her phone before carefully collecting the less damaged items. If researchers had proper permits, they'd registered their presence with the Forestry Service main office. She'd need to check when she returned to the tower. As she secured the evidence in her pack, a sound broke the forest's silence, a rustling too deliberate to be wind, too controlled to be wildlife. Olivia's hand moved instinctively to her service weapon as she pivoted toward the noise. "Forestry Service, identify yourself," she called, voice firm with authority she'd learned to project despite her natural quietness. The rustling intensified, followed by a whine that was distinctly canine. A moment later, a dog emerged from the undergrowth, a Belgian Malinois with the unmistakable vest of a police canine unit. The animal moved with obvious difficulty, favoring its right front leg. Dark stains matted the fur along its flank, and its official vest was torn and singed. Olivia lowered her weapon immediately, shock replacing caution. "Hey there," she said, voice softening as she slowly crouched to appear less threatening. "What happened to you? Where's your handler?" The dog watched her with intelligent wariness, maintaining distance while clearly assessing whether she represented threat or help. Blood dripped slowly from a wound, partially hidden by the tactical vest, creating small, dark spots on the dry forest floor. "It's okay," Olivia continued, reaching slowly into her pack to retrieve her water bottle and a packaged protein bar. "I'm not going to hurt you." The canine took a hesitant step forward, then another. Its training was evident in its measured approach. This was no ordinary pet, but a professional service animal, likely from one of the county sheriff departments or possibly a federal agency. And it was here, injured and alone, miles from any road or trail. The implication sent a chill through Olivia, despite the summer heat. A police dog didn't simply wander away from its handler. If the canine was here, something had happened to the officer it served. Something serious enough that they hadn't been able to maintain control of their partner. As the dog drew closer, Olivia could see a name embroidered on the tactical vest, Ranger. The irony might have made her smile under different circumstances. "Ranger," she said, testing the name. The dog's ears perked immediately. "Good boy, Ranger. Let me help you." The canine finally closed the distance between them, allowing Olivia to check his injuries. A deep laceration ran along his side, partially clotted, but still seeping. Burns marked his right shoulder, and his front paw showed signs of trauma, not broken from what she could tell, but definitely sprained or strained. "Who did this to you?" she murmured, anger building as she realized these weren't accidental injuries. The burns appeared deliberate, as did the cut along his flank. Ranger turned suddenly, gaze fixed on the forest beyond the clearing. His posture changed from cautious to alert, a low growl building in his throat. Olivia froze, listening intently. At first she heard nothing beyond the ambient sounds of the forest. Then faintly but unmistakably, the crack of a branch breaking under weight. Someone was moving through the underbrush, attempting stealth, but failing. She rose slowly, hand returning to her weapon. "Forestry Service, identify yourself immediately," she commanded, positioning herself beside the injured canine. No response came, but the subtle sounds of movement continued, now retreating rather than approaching. Whoever had been watching them was withdrawing. Ranger took a limping step in the direction of the sounds, clearly intent on pursuit despite his injuries. Olivia placed a restraining hand on his uninjured shoulder. "Not in your condition, boy," she said firmly. "We need to get you medical attention first." The dog looked up at her with an expression that seemed almost human in its frustration and determination. Then, to Olivia's surprise, he turned and limped in the opposite direction of the retreating sounds, looking back at her expectantly. "You want me to follow you?" she asked, gathering her pack. Ranger barked once, softly, an affirmative. Olivia hesitated. Protocol dictated she report the damaged research site and the injured police canine immediately. She should return to her tower, call in the situation, wait for backup. The presence of an injured police dog suggested criminal activity, possibly connected to the sabotaged research site. This was beyond her jurisdiction as a forestry ranger, but Ranger had already disappeared into the underbrush, pausing only to ensure she was following. Despite his injuries, he moved with purpose, clearly heading toward a specific destination. If the dog was leading her to an injured officer, minutes could mean the difference between life and death. Olivia made her decision. She activated her GPS tracker, standard procedure when deviating from reported routes, and followed the determined canine deeper into Blackwater Forest. Ranger led her northwest, away from established trails and deeper into the basin. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, forcing them to navigate through dense undergrowth and around massive fallen trees. Despite his injuries, the dog maintained a steady pace, stopping occasionally to ensure Olivia kept up. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They'd been traveling for nearly 40 minutes when Olivia realized they were following what appeared to be an old, overgrown fire road. A remnant from when this section of the forest had been actively logged decades earlier. The road was barely discernible, reclaimed by nature and invisible on current forestry maps, but its subtle linear depression in the landscape was recognizable to her trained eye. "Where are you taking me, Ranger?" she asked, pausing to check her GPS. They were now in one of the least accessible sections of her territory, an area she patrolled perhaps twice a season. The dog continued forward, his determined focus unwavering, despite what must have been considerable pain from his injuries. Whatever drove him, training, loyalty, or something more primal, it overrode his physical distress. The overgrown road curved around a massive outcropping of weather-worn granite, and as they rounded the bend, Olivia stopped abruptly. There, nestled against the base of a steep slope and nearly invisible beneath a canopy of ancient pines, stood a cabin. The structure was small but solidly built, its timber walls weathered to a silvery grey that blended seamlessly with the surrounding forest. A metal stovepipe protruded from the sloped roof, but no smoke rose from it. Windows, small and few, reflected the dappled forest light rather than revealing anything within. This cabin wasn't on any of her maps. After 5 years of methodically exploring every acre of her territory, Olivia had never encountered this structure or even heard rumors of its existence. According to official records, no private inholdings remained in this section of Blackwater Forest. All had been acquired by the government decades ago when the national forest boundaries were established. Yet here stood evidence to the contrary. A cabin that shouldn't exist, hidden so perfectly within the landscape that even satellite imaging had apparently missed it. Ranger had stopped at the edge of the small clearing surrounding the cabin, his posture tense and alert. He turned to look at Olivia, then back at the cabin door, whining softly. "Is someone in there?" she asked quietly, instinctively lowering her voice. "Your handler?" The dog moved toward the cabin, limping more pronouncedly now as fatigue compromised his injured leg. He stopped at the weathered wooden door, pawing at it once before looking back at Olivia with unmistakable expectation. She approached cautiously, senses heightened. The clearing was unnaturally quiet, no birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. Just the soft sigh of wind through pine needles and the accelerated rhythm of her own breathing. No vehicle was visible, no footpath beyond the overgrown fire road they had followed. If someone occupied this cabin, they either accessed it by foot or had concealed their transportation with exceptional care. Olivia unholstered her service weapon and held it in the ready position as she approached the door. Years of solitary ranger work had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct now screamed caution. "Hello? Forestry Service," she called out, positioning herself to the side of the door rather than directly in front. "Is anyone inside?" No response came from within the cabin. Ranger pawed at the door again, more insistently. Olivia tested the handle, unlocked. The door swung inward, with a protesting creak of rarely used hinges, revealing a dimly lit interior. She blinked, allowing her eyes to adjust to the reduced light. The cabin consisted of a single room with a small cooking area, a wood stove for heat, a narrow bed against one wall, and a rough-hewn table with a single chair. Everything was neat, orderly, and covered with a fine layer of dust, suggesting recent but not current habitation. What caught Olivia's attention, however, were the walls. Every available surface was covered with maps, photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes connected by colored string in an elaborate web of relationships. Some of the materials were yellowed with age, others appeared more recent, Together they created a research installation that would have impressed a detective or intelligence analyst. At the center of this information web was a large topographical map of Blackwater Forest, with certain areas circled in red. One of these circled areas corresponded to the location of the sabotaged research site she had discovered earlier. Ranger had moved to the center of the room, turning in a circle as if searching for something specific. He stopped suddenly, moving to a worn rug near the bed and pawing at its edge. Olivia holstered her weapon and knelt beside the dog, pulling back the rug to reveal a trapdoor built into the wooden floor. A recessed metal ring served as its handle. "What is this place?" she whispered, the question directed as much to herself as to the injured K9 beside her. Ranger whined, pawing at the trapdoor with increasing urgency. Olivia grasped the metal ring and pulled. The trapdoor opened smoothly, revealing a short ladder descending into darkness. Cool air wafted upward, carrying with it the unmistakable metallic scent of blood. "Hello?" she called down into the darkness. "Anyone there? I'm with the forestry. Service!" Her voice echoed slightly, suggesting a space larger than she would have expected beneath the small cabin. When no response came, she retrieved her flashlight from her pack and directed its beam into the opening. The light revealed a small underground room, approximately the same dimensions as the cabin above, but with a much lower ceiling. Metal shelving lined the walls, holding dozens of labeled specimen containers, scientific equipment and file boxes. A workbench dominated the center of the space, its surface cluttered with microscopes, testing equipment and notebook computers. Beneath the workbench, partially visible from her vantage point, lay a man's body. Olivia's training took over. She descended the ladder quickly but carefully, keeping her flashlight trained on the unmoving figure. As she reached the bottom, the full scene became clear, and she drew in a sharp breath. The man was dressed in the uniform of a county sheriff's deputy, badge still pinned to his chest. Blood pooled beneath him from what appeared to be a gunshot wound to his abdomen. His face was pale, but his chest rose and fell with shallow, labored breaths. He was alive, barely. "Officer, can you hear me?" Olivia knelt beside him, already pulling medical supplies from her pack. "I'm going to help you." The deputy's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they fixed on her face. "Ranger," he whispered, voice barely audible. "My dog." "He's here," Olivia assured him, pressing a field dressing against the wound to slow the bleeding. "He found me, led me to you. He's injured, but alive." Relief flickered across the deputy's face. "Smart dog," he managed. "Told him. Find help." As if summoned by the conversation, Ranger appeared at the bottom of the ladder, having navigated the steep steps despite his injuries. He moved immediately to his handler's side, lying down with his head resting gently against the man's shoulder. "What happened?" Olivia asked, maintaining pressure on the wound while retrieving her satellite phone. "Who shot you?" The deputy's eyes darted to the specimens lining the walls, then back to Olivia. "Evidence," he said, each word requiring visible effort. 15 years toxic dumping. Northland timber." Olivia froze, the satellite phone halfway to her ear. "What did you say?" "Northland," the deputy repeated. "Been poisoning. A watershed. Causing cancer cluster in county. Proof is all here." His hand moved weakly, gesturing at the underground laboratory. "Researcher. Dr. Abernathy. They killed him last year. I found his notes. Continued his work." The implications crashed through Olivia's consciousness like a physical blow. Northland Timber, the same corporation she had been building a case against when her accident occurred. The case that had left her scarred and driven her from the law into the isolation of forest rangering. This hidden research facility contained evidence of a crime that had gone undetected for 15 years, evidence that people had already died to protect or expose. "Who shot you?" she asked again, more urgently. "Security contractor," the deputy whispered. "Northland hired them to find and destroy. All evidence. Followed me here." His breathing grew more labored. "They'll be back with more men." Olivia completed the call to emergency services, providing their GPS coordinates and a terse explanation of a gunshot victim requiring immediate medical evacuation. The dispatcher promised a helicopter within 30 minutes, weather permitting. As she ended the call, Olivia surveyed the underground laboratory with new understanding. What had initially appeared to be a conspiracy theorist's workspace was actually a meticulously documented scientific investigation, one that connected directly to her own past. The deputy's eyes had closed, consciousness fading as shock and blood loss took their toll. Ranger whined softly, nudging his handler's hand with his nose. "Stay with me, deputy," Olivia urged, checking his pulse. Weak, but present. "Help is coming. What's your name?" "Ethan," he managed. "Ethan Carson. I'm Olivia Reed. I'm going to get you and Ranger out of here safely, and I promise you, this evidence won't disappear. Not this time." Something in her tone must have conveyed her personal connection to the situation. Deputy Carson's eyes opened again, studying her face with renewed focus. "You know, about Northland," he said. It wasn't a question. 5 years ago, I was an environmental lawyer building a case against them for illegal logging practices, Olivia explained, continuing to monitor his condition while gathering her thoughts. "I found preliminary evidence suggesting toxic waste dumping, but before I could investigate further, I was run off the road. My brake lines had been cut. The case was dropped, evidence disappeared, and she gestured to the scar on her face. "I left the law behind." Recognition dawned in the deputy's eyes. "Reed," he whispered, "the lawyer who disappeared after the accident. Read about you when investigating Northland." Olivia nodded, a complex mixture of emotions tightening her throat. For 5 years, she had believed herself a failure, someone who had retreated from an important fight, who had allowed powerful interests to silence her. She had found purpose in protecting the forest directly, but the sense of unfinished business had never left her. Now, through an injured police dog's determined journey to find help for his handler, she had been led directly to the evidence that might finally bring accountability for crimes that had affected countless lives, including her own. "They burned the research site," she told Carson. "I found it earlier today. They must have hoped all the evidence was there." "Back up," Carson managed, his voice growing fainter. "On my phone. Everything is backed up, and samples, other locations." Ranger suddenly lifted his head, ears alert. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he turned toward the ladder. Olivia extinguished her flashlight, plunging the underground room into darkness, broken only by the square of light from the cabin above. She listened intently, hearing what had alerted the injured K9, footsteps on the cabin's wooden floor. The security contractors had returned sooner than expected, and Olivia Reed, forest ranger and former environmental lawyer, now stood as the only defense for an injured deputy, his loyal K9, and evidence that could finally expose a deadly corporate conspiracy 15 years in the making. As the footsteps approached the open trapdoor, Olivia made a silent promise to Deputy Carson, to Ranger, and to herself. This time, the truth would not remain buried in the remote depths of Blackwater Forest. The security contractor's shadow stretched across the square of light from the cabin above, growing larger as he approached the open trapdoor. Olivia pressed herself against the wall beside the ladder, motioning for Ranger to stay still beside his wounded handler. The injured K9 understood immediately. his training overriding his instinct to growl as he flattened himself protectively over Deputy Carson's chest. Olivia held her breath, mind racing through tactical options. Her service weapon was standard, issue for forestry rangers, suitable for wildlife encounters and emergency situations, but not designed for confrontation with armed professionals. The confined space of the underground room offered little tactical advantage, and Carson's condition was deteriorating by the minute. A beam of light sliced through the darkness as the contractor aimed his flashlight down the ladder shaft. Olivia pressed tighter against the wall, momentarily hidden from view, but knowing discovery was inevitable once he descended. "I found something," a male voice called out. "Underground room, blood trail leading down." A second voice responded from elsewhere in the cabin. "Any sign of Carson?" "Can't tell from here. Going to check." Boots appeared on the ladder. Rungs as the contractor began his descent, the beam of his flashlight sweeping the darkness below. Olivia had seconds to decide. Fight or surrender. Either option carried potentially fatal consequences, for herself, for Carson, for Ranger, and for the evidence that now felt like both redemption and responsibility. The contractor's head cleared the opening, flashlight beam still probing the darkness ahead rather than to his sides. In that moment of vulnerability, Olivia acted. She lunged forward, grabbing the contractor's weapon arm with both hands and using her body weight to pull him off balance. Caught mid-descent and unprepared for the attack, he toppled sideways off the ladder, crashing to the floor with Olivia, partially breaking his fall. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, but she maintained her grip on his weapon arm, twisting violently to force the flashlight, and what she now saw was a handgun from his grasp. He fought back with professional efficiency, driving an elbow toward her ribs that she barely managed to deflect. "Holloway!" he shouted up toward the cabin. "It's a trap!" Before his partner could respond, Ranger launched himself from Carson's side, muscle memory from years of police training overriding his injuries. The Malinois clamped powerful jaws around the contractor's forearm with a precision that immobilized without causing critical damage. Exactly as he'd been trained for. Suspect apprehension. The contractor cried out in pain and surprise, his struggle momentarily halted by the K9's grip. Olivia seized the opportunity, wrenching the handgun free and scrambling backward to create distance. "Don't move!" she ordered, aiming the weapon with steady hands that belied her racing heart. "Federal officer, you're trespassing unprotected. Land and assaulting a law enforcement officer." Movement at the top of the ladder indicated the second contractor was preparing to descend. Olivia adjusted her aim toward the opening. "Your partner is secured," she called up. "I have his weapon. Ranger has his arm. The next person through that opening will be shot. Do you understand?" Silence followed, then the sound of retreating footsteps. The tactical situation had shifted, but Olivia harbored no illusions that the second contractor was surrendering. More likely he was repositioning, possibly calling for additional support or preparing a different approach. She turned, her attention to the captured contractor, keeping the weapon trained on him while maintaining awareness of the ladder opening. Ranger maintained his hold, disciplined enough to wait for a release command despite his injuries and exhaustion. "Who are you working for?" Olivia demanded. The man's face remained impassive despite the pain from Ranger's grip. He wore tactical clothing without identifying markers, professional, experienced, and clearly trained to resist interrogation. His eyes assessed her with cold calculation, likely recognizing that her Forestry Service uniform didn't match her tactical response. "You have no idea what you've stepped into," he finally said. "There are 6 more of us surrounding this location. You have maybe 10 minutes before they breach." Whether truth or bluff, Olivia couldn't risk dismissing the claim. The helicopter she'd called would take at least 20 more minutes to arrive, assuming it had already been dispatched. Even then, a medical evacuation team wouldn't be prepared for an armed confrontation. Deputy Carson groaned softly from where he lay. His condition was deteriorating rapidly, each minute without proper medical attention reducing his chances of survival. Ranger glanced toward his handler's sound, but maintained his hold on the contractor, torn between duty and devotion. Olivia made her decision. She couldn't save the evidence, and Carson, simultaneously, not against unknown numbers of armed professionals. But she could ensure Carson's research wouldn't be destroyed, even if she couldn't transport it herself. "Ranger, release," she commanded, hoping the K-9 would respond to basic police commands from someone other than his handler. The Malinois immediately released his grip on the contractor's arm, but remained poised to re-engage if needed. The coordination between dog and handler must have been exceptional for his training to hold so firmly, even with Carson incapacitated. "Face down, hands behind your back," Olivia ordered the contractor, who complied with the calculated cooperation of someone assessing opportunities. She secured his wrists with zip ties from Carson's equipment belt, then quickly searched him for additional weapons, finding a combat knife and backup pistol, which she tucked into her own belt. Time was running critically short if his claim about reinforcements was true. Olivia dragged the now-secured contractor to a support post and bound him to it with additional restraints. It wouldn't hold him indefinitely, but it might buy precious minutes. She turned her attention to Carson, kneeling beside him to check his pulse. Weaker than before, his skin clammy with shock. "Carson," she said urgently, "I need to move you. We can't stay here." His eyes flickered open, consciousness fading, but determination still evident. "Evidence," he whispered, "more important than me." "I'm not leaving you," Olivia stated firmly, "or the evidence, but we need a different approach." She scanned the underground lab, focusing on the specimen containers and documentation. "You said everything is backed up?" Carson nodded weakly. "Cloud storage, password protected, details in my notebook, breast pocket." Olivia quickly located the small waterproof notebook in his uniform pocket. It contained handwritten codes, GPS coordinates, and what appeared to be encryption keys, the roadmap to accessing his digital evidence cache. She heard movement from above. The second. Contractor repositioning, or perhaps the beginning of the reinforcement arrival. Every instinct screamed that time was running out. "I'm going to create a diversion," she told Carson, already formulating a desperate plan. "Then get you out through a different route. Is there another exit from this room?" The captured contractor laughed humorlessly from his position against the post. "There's no other way out. That's why we waited. One entrance, one exit, basic tactical advantage." Carson's eyes moved to the far corner of the room. "False wall," he managed. "Behind, specimen shelf, emergency exit. Leads to drainage. Culvert." The contractor's expression shifted momentarily, surprise quickly masked by professional neutrality. This information was apparently new to him, suggesting gaps in their intelligence about the hidden research facility. Olivia moved quickly to the metal shelving unit Carson had indicated. At first glance, it appeared securely bolted to the wall, but closer inspection revealed an ingenious hinge mechanism disguised as structural supports. The entire unit was designed to swing outward, concealing a narrow passage beyond. "Ranger," she called softly. "Calm." The Malinois limped to her side, exhaustion evident in his movements, but determination undiminished. Together, they returned to Carson. "I need to move you," she told him. "It's going to hurt." Carson nodded weakly. "Do it." With Ranger watching the captured contractor and the ladder opening, Olivia carefully lifted Carson into a fireman's carry. His pained groan cut through her, but there was no gentler option. His weight settled across her shoulders, substantial but manageable, thanks to years of wilderness conditioning. "What about the evidence?" the contractor called from his restraints, voice casual in a way that heightened Olivia's suspicion. "Aren't you taking the samples, the notebooks? After all, that's what this is all about, right?" The question was calculated to either delay her or force her to leave crucial evidence behind. Olivia ignored him, focusing instead on finalizing her plan while adjusting Carson's weight across her shoulders. "Ranger," she said, keeping her voice low. "Guard." She pointed to the contractor. The K9 positioned himself in front of their captive, a clear threat that despite his injuries, he would prevent any attempt at escape. Olivia carefully set Carson down beside the hidden exit, then quickly gathered key evidence samples and Carson's research laptop, stuffing them into her pack alongside her own emergency supplies. From her belt, she removed a signal flare, standard equipment for wilderness rangers. In the confined space of the underground lab, it would create smoke and confusion without causing a serious fire that might destroy the remaining evidence. "Cover your face," she instructed Carson, placing his uniform jacket over his nose and mouth. She positioned herself between him and the ladder, the flare in one hand and the contractor's confiscated weapon in the other. "Last chance," she called to the opening above. "Federal officer with an injured deputy requiring evacuation. Stand down and identify yourselves." No response came. She hadn't expected one. "Ranger, come," she commanded, and the Malinois reluctantly abandoned his guard position to join them by the hidden exit. In one fluid motion, Olivia activated the flare and tossed it toward the center of the lab. Brilliant red light and thick smoke immediately filled the space, the chemical smell sharp and disorienting. She heard the contractor coughing and cursing. From his restrained position and movement at the ladder opening, the second contractor reacting to the sudden development. Olivia thrust open the hidden exit, revealing a narrow earthen tunnel reinforced with timber supports. She helped Carson through first, then guided Ranger into the passage before entering herself and pulling the shelving unit closed behind them. The smoke would make pursuit through this route difficult, buying them precious minutes. The tunnel was low-ceilinged, forcing Olivia to hunch as she half-carried, half-dragged Carson through the darkness, guided only by the beam of her flashlight. Ranger limped ahead, his police training seemingly enabling him to understand their tactical situation, despite his injuries. "How far?" Olivia asked Carson, his weight growing heavier as her adrenaline began to ebb. "100 meters," he gasped, then up, into ravine. The tunnel sloped gradually downward, its earthen floor occasionally giving way to wooden planks covering wetter sections. Dr. Abernathy had clearly designed this emergency exit with careful forethought, anticipating potential threats to his clandestine research operation. The government scientist had been conducting this unofficial investigation for years before his supposed accident. Committed enough to the truth to risk everything, just like Carson was doing now. Just like Olivia had once tried to do before. Her accident had driven her to retreat rather than persist. "Almost there," she encouraged Carson, though the words were equally for herself. The weight of responsibility for his life, for Rangers, for evidence that might finally bring justice, pressed on her as heavily as the deputy's physical form across her shoulders. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only minutes, the tunnel ended at a rough-hewn ladder leading upward to a wooden hatch. Olivia carefully set Carson down, positioning him against the wall where he slumped, consciousness fading. "I'll check it first," she told him, though she wasn't sure he could still hear her. Ranger whined softly, settling protectively beside his handler as Olivia climbed the short ladder. She pushed cautiously against the hatch, relieved when it opened with minimal resistance. Dappled sunlight streamed in, along with fresh air that had never felt so sweet. Olivia emerged into a narrow ravine approximately half a mile from the cabin, based on her mental mapping of their underground route. Dense undergrowth provided natural concealment, and the steep walls of the ravine channeled a small, seasonal stream now reduced to isolated pools by the drought. After confirming they weren't being observed, Olivia returned to the tunnel and began the arduous process of maneuvering Carson up the ladder and out into the ravine. The deputy had lost consciousness entirely, his breathing shallow and pulse thready beneath her fingertips. Ranger followed, his movements increasingly stiff as his injuries and exertion took their toll. Once all three were clear of the tunnel, Olivia concealed the hatch with fallen branches and undergrowth. It wouldn't withstand close inspection, but might delay discovery long enough for her next move. She checked her satellite phone, relieved to find it still had signal in the ravine. The emergency medical evacuation she'd requested earlier would be targeting the cabin's coordinates. She needed to redirect them without alerting the contractors who might be monitoring emergency frequencies. Using Carson's police radio would be too risky. His attackers would certainly be monitoring that channel. Instead, she used her Forestry Service protocols, calling her dispatch with a coded update that would alert them to a change in extraction coordinates without explicitly stating she was under threat. Eastridge to base. Situation evolved from Code 4 to Code 1 Adam, requesting immediate response to new coordinates. She provided their ravine location using the forestry grid system rather than standard GPS, adding multiple casualties including canine, potential environmental contamination requiring hazmat protocols. The environmental contamination reference would trigger heightened security without explicitly mentioning armed suspects. Standard hazmat protocols included law enforcement escorts for medical teams, exactly what they needed without broadcasting their situation to anyone monitoring for keywords like armed suspects or under fire. Her dispatcher acknowledged the update with professional calm that concealed what must have been serious concern. Code 1 Adam represented the highest emergency, priority in their system, rarely used, except in life-threatening situations. Eastridge Medical Evac has been redirected, ETA 12 minutes. Hazmat team notified and responding with appropriate personnel. Maintain your position if possible. 12 minutes. Carson might not have that long without intervention. Olivia quickly checked his wound, finding the bleeding had slowed, but his vital signs continuing to weaken. She applied a fresh field dressing from her pack, then covered him with her emergency blanket to combat shock. Ranger maintained his vigilant guard, despite his own deteriorating condition, his loyalty a tangible force that seemed to transcend his physical limitations. The Malinois positioned himself facing the direction of the cabin, ears alert for any sign of pursuit. "You're an extraordinary partner," Olivia told him, briefly resting her hand on his uninjured shoulder. "Carson is lucky to have you." Billy, Dog's eyes met hers with that unsettling intelligence she'd noted earlier, an awareness that seemed to comprehend not just her words, but their shared situation in all its complexity. There was something deeply moving about his unwavering dedication, his willingness to push through pain and exhaustion in service to his handler and his mission. Olivia found herself reflecting on her own choices since her accident 5 years earlier. She had retreated to the wilderness not just for healing, but as a form of surrender, telling herself she was still protecting the environment through her ranger work, while knowing she had abandoned the larger fight against corporate criminals, like Northland Timber. Carson and Ranger had continued their mission despite the risks, despite being targeted, despite being wounded. Dr. Abernathy had pursued the truth until it cost him his life. And here was Olivia Reed, who had walked away when the fight became dangerous, now thrust back into the battle she had abandoned. A subtle change in Ranger's posture drew her attention, his ears pricked forward, body tensing despite his injuries. He'd detected something beyond human perception. Moments later, Olivia heard it too, the faint but unmistakable sound of search dogs baying in the distance. The contractors had brought tracking dogs. The smoke from the flare might have temporarily confused the scent trail, but it wouldn't take them long to discover the hidden tunnel exit. "They're coming," she told Carson, though she wasn't sure he could hear her in his unconscious state. "But so is our extraction team. Just hold on a little longer." Olivia assessed their defensive position, finding it simultaneously advantageous and vulnerable. The ravine provided natural concealment and limited approach vectors, but also restricted their own movement and escape options. With Carson unconscious and Ranger injured, standing their ground was their only realistic option. She positioned herself at the narrowest point of the ravine, using a fallen log as both cover and a stable shooting platform for the contractor's confiscated weapon. Her forestry training had included firearms proficiency, but this level of potential confrontation far exceeded the wildlife management and emergency response scenarios she'd been prepared for. The baying of the search dogs grew louder, accompanied now by the faint sound of voices, too distant to distinguish words, but clear enough to confirm organized pursuit. Olivia estimated they had perhaps 5 minutes before the contractors discovered their position. In the distance, barely audible above the search party sounds, came the rhythmic thumping of helicopter rotors. The medical evacuation was approaching, but the contractors would reach them first. Ranger whined softly from his position beside Carson, drawing Olivia's attention. The Malinois was looking not toward the sounds of pursuit, but in the opposite direction, up the ravine. His ears were forward, head tilted in that distinctive posture of canine attention. Olivia followed his gaze, at first seeing nothing unusual among the dense vegetation and scattered boulders. Then movement caught her eye, deliberate, controlled movement that spoke of human presence rather than wildlife. She raised the weapon, prepared for another threat, when a voice called softly from the undergrowth. "Forestry Service? This is Sheriff's Department Special Response Team. Hold your position and identify yourself." Relief flooded through Olivia with such force that she momentarily lowered the weapon before recovering her tactical awareness. "Olivia Reed, Forestry Service Ranger, Eastridge Station," she called back, keeping her voice low enough to avoid alerting the approaching contractors. "I have Deputy Carson, wounded, and his K-9 partner, also injured." A moment later, 4 figures in tactical gear emerged from concealment, moving with the disciplined precision of law enforcement special operations. They approached cautiously, weapons at ready positions, but not aimed directly at Olivia. "Silvers, Sheriff's Department SRT." The lead officer identified himself as they reached her position. "We were conducting training exercises when dispatch. Relayed your emergency code. Got here ahead of the medical team." His eyes took in the scene quickly. Carson's unconscious form, Ranger's protective stance despite obvious injuries, and Olivia's improvised defensive position. "Multiple armed suspects approaching from the north." Olivia briefed him rapidly. "Security contractors working for Northland Timber. They shot Carson and tried to destroy evidence of illegal toxic dumping in the watershed." If Silvers was surprised by this information, his professional demeanor concealed it. "Medical evac is 2 minutes out. We'll establish a perimeter and hold off any hostiles." He motioned to his team, who immediately moved to tactical positions covering the ravine approaches. One officer, a woman with a medical kit prominently displayed on her tactical vest, knelt beside Carson to assess his condition. "GSW to abdomen, significant blood loss, early septic shock," she reported. "He needs immediate evac." Ranger allowed her to treat his handler, but maintained physical contact, his body trembling now with exhaustion and pain, yet his vigilance undiminished. The officer noticed, reaching out slowly to check the K-9's injuries, while continuing to monitor Carson's vital signs. "This dog needs emergency veterinary care too," she noted. "Multiple lacerations, burns, possible internal injuries. The distinctive Sound of the helicopter grew louder as it approached their position. Silvers coordinated with the pilot via radio, confirming landing coordinates in a small clearing adjacent to the ravine. Two team members quickly moved to secure the landing zone. "We need to move Carson now," the medic announced, his pressures dropping. As they prepared to transport Carson to the landing zone, the baying of the search dogs suddenly intensified, followed by shouted commands that carried clearly through the forest. "They found the tunnel exit," Olivia warned. "They'll be here any minute." Silvers made an immediate tactical decision. Johnson, Ramirez, defensive positions. Torres, help with the wounded. Reed, you're with me on escort. Olivia found herself automatically responding to the command structure, falling in beside Silvers as they created a protective formation around Torres and the injured deputy. Ranger limped determinedly alongside Carson's improvised stretcher, refusing to be separated despite his deteriorating condition. They had just reached the edge of the clearing when the first shots rang out from the ravine. Johnson and Ramirez, engaging the pursuing contractors. The helicopter touched down as the firefight intensified, its rotors whipping the surrounding vegetation into a frenzy. "Go! Go! Go!" Silvers shouted above the noise, providing covering fire as Torres and Olivia rushed Carson toward the waiting aircraft. Medical personnel emerged from the helicopter, running crouched beneath the rotors to assist with loading the critically injured deputy. Olivia turned back toward the ravine, concern for the SRT officers overwhelming her instinct for self-preservation. Silvers caught her arm. "They'll extract separately," he shouted over the rotor noise. "Standard protocol. Get on board with the evidence and the wounded." The evidence. In the chaos of the moment, Olivia had almost forgotten her pack containing the critical samples and Carson's research laptop. She clutched it tighter, recognizing that beyond Carson's life, it represented justice for countless victims of Northland's environmental crimes, including herself. As she climbed aboard the helicopter, helping to lift Ranger in behind her, Olivia caught a final glimpse of Silvers disappearing back toward the ravine to support his team. The aircraft lifted off immediately, banking sharply away from the gunfire and accelerating towards safety. Inside the medical evacuation helicopter, emergency personnel worked frantically on Carson, establishing IV lines and monitoring equipment. A paramedic with veterinary training began assessing Ranger's injuries, the K9 permitting treatment only because he could maintain visual contact with his handler from his position on the floor. Olivia sat with her back against the vibrating wall of the aircraft, Carson's research materials secure in her lap, as the reality of what had just occurred began to penetrate her adrenaline haze. After 5 years of hiding from her past in the isolation of forest ranger work, she had been thrust directly back into the fight she had abandoned, the battle against Northland Timber's environmental crimes. But this time, she wasn't facing it alone. Carson had already done much of the investigative work, building on Dr. Abernathy's research. She had physical evidence and data backups that could withstand legal scrutiny, and she had witnessed the extraordinary courage of a wounded K9 officer who had refused to abandon his mission despite devastating injuries, a powerful reminder of what true dedication looked like. As the helicopter sped toward the regional medical center, Olivia made a silent vow to herself, to Carson, and to Ranger. This time, she wouldn't retreat. This time, the truth would not remain buried. This time, Northland Timber would face justice for their crimes, not just the environmental devastation, but the human lives they had damaged or destroyed in their pursuit of profit. The battle was far from over, but something fundamental had shifted within Olivia Reed. The forest ranger who had sought isolation as escape from her failures had rediscovered the environmental lawyer who had once been willing to risk everything for justice. And this synthesis of who she had been and who she had become created something new, something stronger and more resilient than either previous version of herself. Ranger's eyes met hers across the helicopter cabin. That uncanny intelligence seeming to recognize the transformation occurring within her. The injured canine's unwavering dedication to his purpose, despite overwhelming odds, had awakened something that had been dormant in Olivia for 5 long years. The courage to face powerful enemies, to stand for truth regardless of personal cost, to complete a mission that mattered. Some messengers came with words, others came with actions that spoke more eloquently than any speech could manage. Ranger had delivered his message through his indomitable spirit and unstoppable determination, showing, rather than telling Olivia what true courage looked like. As the helicopter approached the hospital landing pad, Olivia placed her hand on the research materials in her lap, feeling the weight of responsibility and opportunity they represented. The evidence that might finally bring down Northland Timber had found its way to perhaps the one person with both the legal expertise to understand its significance and the personal motivation to see justice done, regardless of the obstacles ahead. Sometimes, the most unexpected messengers delivered exactly the message we needed most, exactly when we needed it. And sometimes, the path back to our true purpose began with opening a door to help a wounded creature, who turned out to be much more than they initially appeared. The helicopter descended toward the regional medical center, its rotors creating a steady rhythm that seemed to beat in counterpoint to Olivia's racing thoughts. Through the window, she could see emergency personnel assembled on the helipad, ready to receive the critically injured deputy. Several police vehicles had already gathered, their light bars sending blue and red reflections across the hospital's glass facade. This was exactly the kind of chaos and exposure Olivia had spent 5 years avoiding. The isolation of her fire tower had become both sanctuary and prison, a place where she could contribute meaningfully to environmental protection, without facing the painful reminders of her failure to hold Northland Timber accountable. Now that carefully constructed barrier between past and present had been shattered by an injured K-9 who had appeared at precisely the right moment to draw her back into the fight. As the aircraft touched down, medical staff rushed forward with gurneys. Carson was transferred first, the emergency team moving with practiced efficiency as they whisked him toward the trauma center. A veterinary specialist who had been summoned specifically for Ranger approached the helicopter next, guiding a specialized transport stretcher designed for injured service animals. "I need to stay with him," Olivia told the veterinarian, gathering Carson's research materials and her pack. "He won't cooperate unless he knows his handler is safe." The veterinarian nodded, understanding. "We have a treatment room near the Human Emergency Department for exactly this reason. Service animals and their handlers often need proximity." Now, Ranger had reached the limits of his endurance. The Malinois allowed himself to be transferred to the veterinary stretcher, his eyes never leaving Olivia as she followed, carrying the evidence that had cost so much to protect. The dog seemed to understand that she represented his link to Carson now, trusting her to maintain the chain of responsibility. Inside the hospital, Olivia found herself immediately confronted by the reality she had dreaded. Questions, scrutiny, and the unavoidable involvement of multiple agencies. A sheriff's department detective was already waiting, accompanied by 2 uniformed deputies who positioned themselves protectively near the entrance to the trauma center where Carson had been taken. "Detective Lauren Hargrove," the woman introduced herself, badge already extended. She was mid-40s with prematurely silver hair and the focused intensity of someone who had seen too much to waste time on pleasantries. "I need your statement about what happened to Deputy Carson." "The evidence needs to be secured first," Olivia replied, clutching her pack tighter. "There are people willing to kill for what's in here." Hargrove's expression sharpened. "What exactly are we dealing with, Ranger Reed?" "Evidence of toxic dumping by Northland Timber that's caused a cancer cluster in the county. Carson was..." shot by security contractors working for Northland when he discovered their cover-up operation. They'll be coming for this evidence, and they'll have resources. To her credit, Hargrove didn't dismiss the claim outright. Northland has considerable influence in this region. What you're suggesting would require significant protection measures. She studied Olivia's face more carefully. You seem personally invested in this situation. Olivia hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Her instinct for privacy battled with the practical necessity of establishing her credibility. 5 years ago, I was an environmental lawyer building a case against Northland for illegal logging practices, she finally said. When I discovered evidence suggesting toxic waste dumping, I was run off the road in what was ruled an accident. My brake lines had been cut. I left the law after that and became a forestry ranger. Recognition dawned in Hargrove's eyes. Olivia Reed. I remember the news stories. You disappeared from the legal community without explanation. Some suggested you'd been paid off. The accusation, even presented as third-party speculation, stung with unexpected force. I wasn't bought, Olivia stated flatly. I was intimidated, injured, and couldn't find anyone willing to continue the investigation. So I found another way. To protect the environment? Hargrove nodded, reassessing. And now Carson's investigation has brought everything full circle. She gestured to a nearby security office. Let's secure that evidence properly and get your statement. I'll have officers escort the veterinary team working on Ranger. The next hours passed in a blur of bureaucratic procedure and institutional security measures. Olivia provided a detailed statement, catalogued the evidence she'd rescued from the hidden laboratory, and surrendered Carson's research materials to the proper authorities, though not before ensuring everything was photographed and properly documented to prevent disappearance. Detective Hargrove proved to be unexpectedly thorough and professional, taking Olivia's claims about Northland's involvement seriously rather than dismissing them as conspiracy theories. She arranged for federal environmental protection agencies to be notified and requested specialized evidence handling protocols. The sheriff's special response team reported at least 4 armed security contractors at the scene, Hargrove informed Olivia as they finished processing the evidence. They retreated when outgunned, but haven't been apprehended. We've increased security here and at all county facilities. These people are professionals, likely with military or special operations backgrounds. Olivia's thoughts turned to the hidden cabin and lab. There's more evidence still at the site. Years of research, specimens, documentation. If Northland realizes we only recovered a portion, they'll destroy everything else. A forensic team is being assembled, but it will take time to coordinate with federal agencies, Hargrove replied. The location is remote, and we need specialized personnel to handle potential toxic materials safely. Time they didn't have. Olivia felt a familiar tension building, the same urgency that had driven her to push too hard, too fast in her previous case against Northland. That approach had ended with her nearly dying on a mountain road. The rational response would be to step back now, let the proper authorities handle the investigation, return to her fire tower and the isolation that had kept her safe for 5 years. The detective seemed to read her thoughts. Your involvement in this case is officially concluded. Ranger Reed, you've done more than enough by rescuing Carson and securing this evidence. The agencies taking over have the resources and authority to handle Northland properly. The words were both release and dismissal. Olivia could walk away now with a clear conscience, having fulfilled her duty and passed the burden to those better positioned to bear it. It was the sensible choice, the safe choice. I'd like to check on Ranger, she said instead, postponing the decision that loomed before her. The K9 treatment area occupied a specialized wing designed for service animals. Ranger had been stabilized, his wounds cleaned and properly dressed, IV fluids running to combat dehydration and blood loss. The Malinois lay on a padded treatment table, sedated but not fully unconscious, his eyes following movement in the room with drug-dulled awareness. "He's got remarkable constitution," the veterinarian told Olivia as she entered. "The injuries should have incapacitated him hours ago, but he kept going through sheer determination. These working dogs sometimes exceed what we believe physically possible when they're driven by their training and bond with their handlers." Olivia approached the table slowly, allowing Ranger to register her presence. Despite the sedation, his tail thumped weakly against the padded surface, recognition and acknowledgement. "How is Deputy Carson?" she asked. "Still in surgery. It's going to be touch and go for the next 24 hours, but he made it to treatment, in time to have a fighting chance. That wouldn't have happened without you and this exceptional dog." Olivia gently placed her hand on Ranger's uninjured shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath her palm. The connection grounded her, providing clarity amid the chaos of competing priorities and conflicting instincts. "What happens to Ranger while Carson recovers?" she asked. "Normally, another canine officer would take temporary custody," the veterinarian explained. "But given the circumstances, the attack and ongoing security concerns, the department may place him in protective custody at a secure facility." The thought of Ranger being confined to a kennel, separated from the partner he had risked everything to save and surrounded by strangers, struck Olivia as profoundly wrong. This dog had already endured too much in service to his mission. He deserved better. "I'd like to volunteer," she found herself saying, "to care for him during Carson's recovery." The veterinarian looked surprised. That would be unusual. There are protocols for service animal custody, especially in active criminal cases. You're not law enforcement. "I'm a federal officer, even if just a forestry ranger," Olivia countered. "I have wilderness medical training, experience with working dogs from my backcountry patrols, and I'm already involved in this case. Most importantly, Ranger knows and trusts me." As if confirming her statement, Ranger made a determined effort to move closer to her despite his injuries and the sedation. The veterinarian observed this with professional interest. "You do seem to have established a connection," she acknowledged. "I'll speak with the sheriff's department, but the decision will ultimately be theirs. Ranger is not just a pet, but an officer and material witness in an attempted murder case." When the veterinarian left to continue her rounds, Olivia remained beside Ranger, her hand resting lightly on his coat. The events of the day had forced her to step outside the carefully controlled environment she had created for herself after the accident. For 5 years, she had structured her life to minimize risk, unpredictability, and human connection, the very elements that had overwhelmed her today. And yet, she had functioned effectively under pressure. Her tactical decisions had saved Carson, Ranger, and the critical evidence. Perhaps the isolation she had chosen had been less about healing and more about hiding from failure, from responsibility, from the painful truth that she had allowed powerful interests to escape accountability. A soft whine from Ranger interrupted her introspection. The Malinois was watching her with that unsettling intelligence, as if reading the conflict within her. "What would you do?" she asked quietly. "If you weren't injured, if you could choose your next move?" The question was rhetorical, of course, yet something in the steadfast determination she had witnessed in Ranger throughout the day, his unwavering commitment to his purpose despite overwhelming obstacles, seemed to offer its own answer. A knock at the treatment room door drew her attention. Detective Hargrove entered, her expression suggesting new developments. "Deputy Carson is out of surgery," she reported. "Still critical but stable. The doctors are cautiously optimistic." She paused, studying Olivia with a considering gaze. I've been in touch with your supervisor at the Forestry Service. Given the circumstances, they've approved administrative leave if you wish to remain involved in this situation. Olivia felt a conflicting surge of gratitude and wariness. In what capacity? Two possibilities, Hargrove replied. First, as temporary guardian for Ranger, if you're still offering. Our K9 officers are stretched thin, and given the security concerns, having him with someone already connected to the case makes sense. And the second possibility? As a consultant to the Joint Task Force being formed to investigate the Northland situation. Your background as an environmental attorney combined with your first-hand knowledge of this case makes you valuable. The federal prosecutors would appreciate your insights. The offer represented everything Olivia had been avoiding: visibility, responsibility, and direct confrontation with the corporation that had nearly killed her. It meant stepping back into the arena where she had previously failed, risking not just professional credibility, but personal safety. What about the evidence? From the cabin, she asked, diverting from the immediate question of her involvement. Grove's expression tightened slightly. That's part of why we need your help. The forensic team won't be able to access the site until tomorrow at the earliest. By then, Northland's people will have sanitized everything, Olivia finished. The familiar frustration rose within her, the same pattern that had played out 5 years ago when crucial evidence had disappeared while bureaucracy moved at its own measured pace. We've requested emergency injunctions and expedited warrants, Hargrove assured her, but you understand the realities. Olivia did understand. Corporations like Northland maintain plausible deniability through layers of contractors and subsidiaries. By the time the proper authorities arrived with the proper paperwork, the hidden laboratory would be empty or destroyed, with no direct evidence connecting Northland to either the site or the security contractors. What would Carson want? Olivia asked, gesturing toward Ranger. If he were conscious right now. He spent 2 years building this case after Dr. Abernathy's death, Hargrove replied. Worked off duty, used personal funds, risked his career. When he found evidence of the cancer cluster affecting families in the Eastern County, including his sister's family, it became an obsession. He'd want the investigation completed no matter what. The revelation added new dimension to Carson's dedication. Not just professional commitment, but personal investment. Family members potentially harmed by Northland's environmental crimes. Ranger whined again, more insistently this time, drawing both women's attention. Despite sedation and injury, the K9 was struggling to rise, his focus fixed on the door with the alertness that suggested he'd detected something significant. "What is it, boy?" Hargrove asked, automatically reaching for her weapon. The treatment room door opened before Olivia could respond, revealing a man in an expensive suit flanked by 2 uniformed deputies. His silver hair and carefully cultivated tan projected authority and success, while his expression conveyed practiced concern. "Detective Hargrove," he greeted with professional courtesy before turning his attention to Olivia. "And Ranger Reed, I believe. I'm District Attorney William Prescott. I wanted to personally assure you that my office is taking these allegations against Northland Timber with utmost seriousness." Ranger's reaction to the district attorney was unmistakable, a low growl building in his throat despite his weakened state. Olivia placed a calming hand on the dog's shoulder, noting the intensity of his response. "It's unusual for a district attorney to make personal hospital visits for case intake," she observed, keeping her tone neutral while trying to understand Ranger's apparent distrust. Prescott smiled smoothly. "When one of our deputies is critically injured in the line of duty, it demands special attention, particularly when it involves allegations against the largest employer in our region." Something in his phrasing triggered Olivia's legal instincts, the subtle emphasis on allegations, and the immediate connection to Northland's economic importance. She had encountered similar rhetorical techniques from opposing counsel representing powerful corporate interests. Not allegations, she corrected firmly. Evidence, physical samples, documentation, and a wounded deputy and K9 officer who can testify to being attacked by armed security contractors. Prescott's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened slightly. Of course, poor choice of words on my part. Rest assured, my office will review everything thoroughly once the formal investigation is complete. Hargrove stepped forward slightly, her positioning subtle but unmistakably protective. We're coordinating with federal agencies, given the environmental aspects of the case. EPA and FBI have already been notified. As is appropriate, Prescott agreed smoothly, though I would caution against premature escalation before local authorities have completed their initial assessment. Corporate cases require particular care to avoid unnecessary economic disruption to the community. The subtext was clear, slow-walking the investigation while emphasizing Northland's importance to the local economy. It was a strategy Olivia had encountered repeatedly in her environmental law practice, using jobs and tax revenue as shields against accountability for corporate malfeasance. Ranger's growl intensified, causing one of the deputies accompanying Prescott to place his hand on his weapon. The district attorney appeared unfazed by the canine's hostility. "The animal appears distressed," he observed. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion elsewhere. Or perhaps we should consider why a highly trained police canine is responding negatively to your presence," Olivia suggested, her suspicions crystallizing. "These dogs are exceptional judges of character and threat." The subtle shift in Prescott's expression, a momentary tightening around the eyes quickly masked by professional affability, confirmed her instinct. Something about this man had triggered Ranger's protective response. "Dogs respond to all manner of stimuli," Prescott dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Scents, sounds, even the memory of someone with similar physical characteristics who may have harmed them previously. I wouldn't read too much into animal behavior." Detective Hargrove had noticed the exchange as well, her experienced gaze moving between Ranger and the district attorney with increased focus. "Mr. Prescott, I don't recall notifying your office about Ranger Reed's involvement or her location at the hospital." The question hung in the air, unanswered for just a beat too long, before Prescott responded. "I was briefed by the sheriff, naturally. As the chief law enforcement officer for the county, I'm kept apprised of all significant incidents." He checked his watch with practiced casualness. "I should let you both rest. Detective Hargrove, I'll expect a preliminary briefing tomorrow morning." After Prescott and his escorts departed, Hargrove turned to Olivia with a troubled expression. "The sheriff hasn't had time to brief anyone. He's been in continuous emergency response mode, coordinating with federal agencies." And Ranger's reaction was more than general anxiety, Olivia added, stroking the Malinois, who had settled somewhat but remained alert. He recognized something specific about Prescott, or someone connected to Prescott, Hargrove suggested. Carson mentioned concerns about potential internal leaks when he first began finding evidence of the cover-up. He kept most of his investigation compartmentalized, even from his own department. The implications were disturbing, but not entirely surprising. Environmental crimes involving powerful corporations often entangled local officials through campaign contributions, economic leverage, or more direct forms of influence. "I need to see Carson's complete research," Olivia decided. "Not just the samples we recovered, but everything he documented about the cancer cluster, Dr. Abernathy's original findings, and potential connections within local government." Hargrove nodded agreement. "His home is under police protection. Now, I can arrange access." She hesitated, then added more personally, "You're diving back into dangerous waters, Reed. Are you sure about this? No one would blame you for walking away, especially given your history with Northland." The question forced Olivia to confront the choice she had been circling since the moment Ranger appeared at her fire tower. Return to isolation and safety, or re-engage with the fight she had abandoned 5 years earlier. She looked down at Ranger, who met her gaze with unwavering intensity despite his injuries and exhaustion. This dog had pursued his mission through pain, danger, and separation from his handler, driven by training, loyalty, and what seemed like a profound understanding of purpose that transcended self-preservation. What would it say about her if she chose comfort over commitment when this wounded animal had demonstrated such extraordinary dedication? "I'm sure," Olivia answered, the decision crystallizing with unexpected clarity. Carson and Ranger risked everything to expose this corruption. "Dr. Abernathy died for it. I walked away once when the fight got dangerous. I won't make that mistake again." As if understanding her commitment, Ranger relaxed slightly, his tail offering a single thump of approval against the treatment table. The tension that had accompanied Prescott's presence gradually dissipated from the K9's powerful frame. "I'll arrange a protective detail," Hargrove said, "for both you and Ranger. If you're officially joining this investigation, you've just painted a target on your back." "The target was already there," Olivia replied. "I just stopped running from it." Later that evening, with Ranger cleared for release under her temporary guardianship, Olivia found herself in a hotel room specially secured by the sheriff's department. The Malinois rested on a blanket beside the bed, medications managing his pain while his remarkable constitution began the healing process. Carson remained in intensive care, his condition stable but critical. The doctors had indicated he might remain unconscious for days as his body recovered from trauma and surgery. Until then, Ranger represented both partner and witness to whatever Carson had uncovered in his investigation. Olivia sat at the small desk, reviewing the preliminary reports Hargrove had shared about the attack and the evidence recovered from the hidden laboratory. The samples contained alarming levels of heavy metals and industrial chemicals, consistent with manufacturing byproducts from Northland's timber processing operations. The contamination patterns matched known cancer cluster locations in the watershed, serving the eastern county. But scientific evidence was only part of the battle. As an environmental attorney, Olivia had learned that winning these cases required proving not just that contamination existed, but that specific actors knowingly caused it and deliberately concealed their actions. The legal standard for corporate criminal liability was intentionally difficult to meet, a reality she had faced repeatedly in her previous career. Her phone chimed with a message from Hargrove. "Forensic team delayed until afternoon tomorrow. Weather and administrative issues with warrants." The predictable stonewalling had begun. By tomorrow afternoon, the hidden cabin and laboratory would be emptied or destroyed, with no evidence connecting it to Northland beyond the samples they'd already secured. Without additional corroboration, those samples could be dismissed as isolated contamination from unknown sources. Ranger lifted his head, sensing her frustration and tension. The Malinois studied her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to evaluate not just her actions, but her resolve. "What would you do?" she asked him again, the rhetorical question. "Becoming something of a touchstone. If you could move right now, where would you go?" The dog's eyes flicked meaningfully toward her packed gear, still containing her forestry service equipment, compass, detailed topographical maps, wilderness, survival kit. All the tools needed for someone intimately familiar with the terrain to navigate back to that hidden cabin, even in darkness. The responsible approach would be to wait for the official forensic team to follow proper chain of custody procedures. For evidence collection, to operate within the system despite its flaws and vulnerabilities to manipulation. That was what Olivia, the environmental lawyer, would have advised any client. But Carson hadn't waited for official sanction to pursue the truth about Northland's environmental crimes. Ranger hadn't hesitated to push beyond normal limits when lives and justice were at stake. And Dr. Abernathy had operated outside conventional channels to document evidence that powerful interests wanted buried. Sometimes the system protected those within it, and sometimes it protected those who controlled it from outside. "We can't wait until afternoon," Olivia told Ranger, her decision solidifying as she spoke. "By then, everything will be gone." She began gathering essential equipment, mentally calculating timelines and risk factors. The protective detail outside her door would complicate matters, but not insurmountably. She had spent 5 years learning every trail, stream, and ridgeline in her jurisdiction. There were ways back to that cabin that only someone intimately familiar with the wilderness would know. Ranger watched her preparations with alert interest, attempting to rise despite his injuries. "Not you," she told him gently but firmly. "You've done more than enough. This part is my responsibility." The Malinois seemed to consider this directive before deliberately ignoring it, struggling to his feet despite obvious pain. His message was clear. Mission not complete, duty not relinquished. "You'll tear your stitches," Olivia admonished, though the dog's determination stirred something profound within her. Even now, barely able to stand, Ranger refused to abandon his purpose. The contrast with her own previous surrender could not have been more stark. Her phone chimed again. Another message from Hargrove. "Prescott scheduled press conference tomorrow 9 a.m. about rumors of environmental concerns. Moving to contain narrative." The timeline had accelerated. By morning, the district attorney would be publicly minimizing the situation, characterizing Carson's evidence as unsubstantiated allegations while assuring the community that proper procedures were being followed. Meanwhile, any remaining evidence would conveniently disappear before official investigation could document it. Olivia made her decision. She would return to the hidden laboratory tonight, using her wilderness skills and knowledge of the terrain. To avoid detection, she would document everything thoroughly before it could be destroyed, creating a parallel evidence chain that could corroborate the samples already recovered. It meant breaking protocols, potentially compromising chain of custody for future prosecution, and placing herself at risk from the same security contractors who had shot Carson. From a strictly legal perspective, it was inadvisable, bordering on reckless, but sometimes justice required moving beyond conventional boundaries, especially when those boundaries had been deliberately designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. As she finalized her preparations, Olivia found herself meeting Ranger's steady gaze once more. The injured canine maintained his determined stance, clearly communicating his intention to accompany her, despite his condition. "You've already done the impossible today," she told him, kneeling to gently check his bandages. "No one would expect more from you." Ranger's response was to move deliberately toward the door, his message unmistakable despite his physical limitations. Some missions transcended normal expectations. Some duties couldn't be relinquished, regardless of personal cost. In that moment, Olivia Reed, environmental lawyer turned forest ranger, now turning investigator, found herself being taught the most profound lesson of her professional life by a wounded dog who refused to abandon his purpose. If Ranger could push beyond physical limitations to fulfill his duty, how could she do any less? The hotel room clock read 11:42 p.m. as Olivia finished her preparations. She had changed from her forestry uniform into dark hiking clothes better suited for nighttime movement. Her backpack contained only essentials: water, energy bars, first aid supplies, night vision monocular, GPS unit, digital camera with extra Memory cards, specimen collection materials, and a satellite phone programmed with Hargrove's direct number. Ranger watched her methodical preparations from his position by the door, still maintaining his determined stance despite the pain evident in his occasional weight shifts. The veterinarian had provided pain medication and antibiotics, emphasizing that the K9 needed complete rest for at least 48 hours. Those medical directives clearly held no sway over Ranger's sense of duty. "This is unprecedented, you know," Olivia told him quietly as she double-checked her gear. A forestry ranger and an injured police K9 conducting an unauthorized evidence collection operation. Ranger's expression remained steadfast, his eyes conveying an intelligence that seemed to fully comprehend both the impropriety and the necessity of their planned actions. The protective detail stationed outside her door presented the first challenge. 2 deputies had been assigned in rotating shifts, with strict instructions to maintain visual contact with her at all times. Their presence was meant for protection, but would effectively prevent her from returning to the cabin site undetected. Olivia had spent enough time in the wilderness to understand that direct confrontation was rarely the optimal strategy when facing obstacles. Nature taught subtlety, patience, and the value of working with existing conditions rather than against them. She had learned to navigate challenges by finding the path of least resistance, a principle that applied as effectively to human systems as to natural ones. She opened her phone and dialed Hargrove's number. "Detective, I've been reviewing Carson's preliminary findings," she began when Hargrove answered. "Something concerns me about the timeline. Carson's notes indicate he visited the research site 3 days ago and found everything intact. Today, it was destroyed. Someone knew he'd discovered it." Hargrove's voice came through with the focused intensity of someone accustomed to processing critical information at odd hours. "You're thinking inside information." "The district attorney appeared at the hospital without being officially notified," Olivia continued. "And Ranger's reaction to him was significant. Carson must have had suspicions about internal leaks. Did he document them anywhere?" "Not in what I've reviewed so far," Hargrove replied, "but he kept separate notebooks for different aspects of the investigation. The most sensitive material might be at his residence. I could meet you there first thing tomorrow." "I'd like to go tonight," Olivia pressed, "before the press conference, before anything else disappears." A moment of silence followed as Hargrove evaluated the request against protocol and pragmatism. "The protective detail would need to accompany you, and I'd have to authorize access to the scene." "Understood," Olivia agreed, her plan taking shape. "I appreciate your flexibility, Detective." 15 minutes later, Olivia emerged from her hotel room with Ranger walking stiffly but determinedly beside her. The K9's presence had required additional negotiation, but she had convinced Hargrove that Ranger might recognize evidence or locations significant to Carson that others would miss. The deputies on protective detail escorted them to a department SUV, maintaining professional vigilance as they drove through the quiet streets toward Carson's residence on the outskirts of town. Olivia noted the route carefully, mentally mapping their location relative to the wilderness area containing the hidden cabin. Carson's home proved to be a modest, single-story house, set on 3 acres backing up to national forest land. A deputy was already stationed on the front porch, with evidence tape securing the doors and windows. Hargrove had called ahead, authorizing their access to the property with specific limitations. "We're cleared to examine Carson's research materials only," the lead deputy explained as he removed the evidence tape from the front door. Detective Hargrove emphasized that nothing leaves the premises without proper documentation and chain of custody procedures. "Of course," Olivia agreed, knowing that her primary objective wasn't to remove evidence, but to understand the broader context of Carson's investigation, particularly any information that might lead back to the hidden cabin. I just want to better understand what he was working on so I can assist the official investigation. Inside, Carson's home reflected the focused dedication she had already intuited from his actions. The living room had been converted into an investigation headquarters, with maps covering one wall, file boxes stacked neatly by subject matter, and a computer workstation surrounded by reference materials. Every surface conveyed meticulous organization and single-minded purpose. Ranger moved immediately to a closed door off the main room, pawing insistently at the handle. When Olivia opened it, she discovered Carson's home office, a smaller space, with additional files and a gun safe in the corner. The K9 circled the room, nose working close to the baseboards, clearly tracking a specific scent. "He's alerting on something," Olivia told the deputy who had followed them. K9 officers often train their dogs to recognize specific evidence types. Ranger stopped at a section of wall behind the desk, whining softly. Olivia examined the area carefully, noting subtle inconsistencies in the baseboard construction. Pressing gently on what appeared to be a seamless joint revealed a small hidden compartment. Carson had a concealed storage space, she announced, allowing the deputy to witness and document her discovery. Inside the compartment lay a waterproof case containing a notebook, a portable hard drive, and a flash drive labeled Insurance. The notebook proved to be Carson's most private documentation, observations, suspicions, and connections he hadn't included in his official materials. The entries dated back 2 years, beginning with his sister's cancer diagnosis and his discovery that several families in her neighborhood had experienced similar health issues. All lived downstream from Northland's main processing facility. He was building a case methodically, Olivia explained to the deputy as she carefully photographed each page before returning it to the case, starting with the cancer cluster, then tracing it to water contamination, then connecting that to Northland's operations. Ranger had continued his meticulous examination of the office, eventually settling beside a filing cabinet with another soft whine. Inside, Olivia found folders documenting Carson's communication with Dr. Abernathy, the government scientist whose accidental death had preceded Carson's investigation. Abernathy was collecting water and soil samples for years, she noted, reviewing the correspondence. He suspected industrial contamination was causing widespread environmental damage, but couldn't get official support for a comprehensive study. Carson picked up his research after the accident. The deputy maintained a professional distance, documenting their examination without commenting on its substance. His neutrality was appropriate, but raised questions about how much information might flow back to potential leaks within the department. As Olivia continued reviewing Carson's materials, a pattern emerged that confirmed her suspicions. The deputy had documented meetings with multiple families affected by the cancer cluster, consultations with environmental health experts, and attempts to engage official environmental protection agencies, all of which had been stymied by bureaucratic obstacles or sudden loss of interest from initially supportive officials. Most troubling were Carson's notes about District Attorney Prescott, who had initially encouraged his investigation before abruptly withdrawing support after a private meeting with Northland executives. The timing coincided with Prescott's surprisingly well-funded re-election campaign. Carson suspected the DA was compromised, Olivia said quietly, more to herself than the observing deputy. The notebook contained detailed observations about Prescott's changed behavior, his financial disclosures, and property acquisitions that seemed inconsistent with his public salary. Ranger had settled by the desk, his attention now fixed on Olivia, rather than the search. The K9's intelligent eyes seemed to track her growing understanding of the situation's complexity. What had begun as an environmental crime investigation had expanded to encompass potential corruption at multiple levels of local government. She turned her attention to Carson's maps, focusing on the wilderness area containing the hidden cabin. His notations revealed not just the cabin's location, but multiple other sites he suspected contained evidence of contamination. Small research stations Dr. Abernathy had established throughout the watershed. If these locations still contained intact evidence, they would provide crucial corroboration for the samples already recovered. "I'd like to photograph these maps for reference," Olivia told the deputy, deliberately casual. "They'll help me understand the geographical context of the investigation." The deputy nodded. "That's within Detective Hargrove's authorization parameters." Olivia carefully documented the maps and continued examining materials until nearly 2 a.m., building a comprehensive understanding of Carson's investigation while identifying the most critical locations for potential evidence recovery. Throughout this process, Ranger remained vigilant, but increasingly fatigued, his injuries and medication finally beginning to overcome his extraordinary determination. "I think we've done enough for tonight," she finally announced, noting the Nine's drooping eyelids and labored breathing. "Ranger needs rest, and I should review my notes before tomorrow's official briefing." The deputy appeared relieved, having maintained professional alertness despite the late hour. "I'll secure the scene and escort you back to the hotel." During the return journey, Olivia maintained casual conversation about non-essential aspects of the case, while her mind processed the critical information she had discovered. Carson's investigation was far more extensive than she had initially realized, with evidence distributed across multiple locations specifically to prevent its complete destruction if any single site was compromised. More concerning were his documented suspicions about corruption extending beyond Northland to local officials, including the district attorney, now positioning himself to control the narrative around the investigation. If Carson was correct, the official channels Olivia had been advised to work through were themselves compromised. Back at the hotel, the protective detail resumed their position outside her door. Ranger collapsed onto his blanket immediately, physical exhaustion finally overriding his sense of duty. Olivia administered his prescribed medications and gently checked his bandages before turning her attention to planning her next move. The hotel room's sliding glass door opened onto a small balcony overlooking a landscaped courtyard. Beyond that lay a public park that backed up to the National Forest boundary, the same forest that extended all the way to the hidden cabin containing Carson's primary evidence. For someone with Olivia's wilderness navigation skills, it presented a viable route that would bypass roads and potential surveillance. She checked her watch. 2:37 a.m. The forensic team wouldn't reach the cabin until afternoon at the earliest, but Northland's security contractors would almost certainly move much sooner. If she was going to preserve the evidence before it disappeared, she needed to act within the next few hours. Ranger watched her from his blanket, eyes heavy with exhaustion and medication, but still tracking her movements with intelligent awareness. When Olivia began quietly gathering her backpack and essential equipment, the Malinois struggled to rise despite his obvious pain. "No," she told him firmly but gently, "you've done more than enough. You need to heal." Ranger's response was a soft whine that managed to convey both protest and resignation. For the first time since their partnership began, the K9's extraordinary will was being overridden by physical limitation. The frustration in his expressive eyes was unmistakable. Olivia knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his uninjured shoulder. "I understand," she said quietly. "Believing in a mission so completely that stopping feels impossible, even when continuing might break you. I've been there." The memory of her own breaking point 5 years earlier surfaced with unexpected clarity. the hospital room where she'd awakened after the accident, the realization that powerful interests had nearly killed her to protect their secrets, the moment she'd decided that survival required retreat rather than continued confrontation. "I made the wrong choice." Then she told Ranger, the connection between them deepening as she articulated truths she had never spoken aloud. "I told myself I was being strategic, finding another way to serve the environment through my Ranger work. But really, I was afraid. I let them win by convincing myself the fight was unwinnable." Ranger's eyes held steady on hers, neither judging nor absolving, simply witnessing her moment of honest reckoning with past choices. "Carson didn't stop," she continued. "Dr. Abernathy didn't stop. And you—" her voice caught unexpectedly, "you pushed beyond what should have been physically possible because the mission mattered more than the pain." The K-9's tail thumped once against the blanket, acknowledgement of her understanding. "I'm going back to the cabin," Olivia told him, her decision crystallizing into absolute certainty. "Not just to collect evidence, but because it's time to stop running, time to finish what I started 5 years ago." She checked her equipment one final time, then carefully opened the sliding glass door to the balcony. The night air carried the scent of pine and the distant sound of highway traffic, a reminder of the intersection between wilderness and civilization that had defined her professional life. "Rest and heal," she instructed Ranger. "When I come back, we'll need your strength for what comes next." The Malinois watched as she slipped silently over the balcony railing, dropping the short distance to the landscaped grounds below. His quiet whine of concern was the last sound she heard as she disappeared into the shadows, headed toward the forest boundary and the mountain trails beyond. Olivia moved with the quiet confidence of someone intimately familiar with nocturnal, wilderness travel. Her years as a ranger had taught her to navigate by subtle landmarks, to find stable footing on uncertain terrain, to merge with the natural environment rather than fighting against it. These skills, developed during her retreat from the legal battlefield, now served her return to that very fight. The irony wasn't lost on her. The capabilities she had cultivated while avoiding confrontation with Northland had become essential tools for resuming that confrontation more effectively. Perhaps what had felt like surrender had actually been preparation, not an ending but a transformative interval that had equipped her with exactly the skills she now needed. The forest welcomed her with familiar sounds and scents, the soft call of a nighthawk, the rustling of nocturnal creatures in the undergrowth, the resinous fragrance of pine intensified by the evening's light rainfall. Her breathing settled into the rhythmic pattern of sustained exertion as she followed game trails and natural contours that would lead her toward the hidden cabin. 2 hours into her journey, with the first hints of pre-dawn light softening the eastern horizon, Olivia paused to check her position against Carson's map coordinates. The ravine where she and Carson had been evacuated lay approximately half a mile ahead, with the cabin situated another quarter-mile beyond. She would need to approach with extreme caution, assuming Northland's security contractors might have established surveillance of the site. As she continued forward, moving with deliberate stealth, Olivia's thoughts returned to Ranger. The K-9's extraordinary determination had catalyzed her own transformation from reluctant witness to active participant. His unwavering commitment to purpose, despite devastating personal cost, had awakened something she had allowed to go dormant. The understanding that meaningful justice often required personal risk. When she reached the ravine's edge, Olivia dropped to a prone position, using her night vision monocular to scan the area before proceeding. The pre-dawn forest appeared undisturbed, with no obvious signs of human activity. The helicopter evacuation site showed only the expected disturbance from yesterday's operation, with no indication that anyone had returned. Moving with increased caution, She made her way across the ravine and up the opposite slope, approaching the cabin site from the rear rather than following the more obvious access route. Carson's maps had indicated a maintenance path circling behind the structure that would provide better concealment. When the cabin came into view through the trees, Olivia froze, processing what she was seeing with growing concern. The structure appeared intact, but showed signs of recent activity. Fresh tire tracks in the soft ground, portable generator humming softly beside the wall, lights visible through the partially covered windows. Someone had returned to the site and was currently inside. The question was whether they were legitimate investigators or Northland's people working to remove evidence before the official team arrived. Olivia consulted her watch. 5:18 a.m. The official forensic team wasn't scheduled until afternoon. Detective Hargrove would have notified her if plans had changed. The most likely explanation was that Northland security contractors had returned to sanitize the scene, exactly as she had feared. She needed closer observation to confirm her suspicions before deciding how to proceed. Using the natural cover provided by the forest, Olivia circled to a position that offered a direct view through one of the cabin's rear windows. What she saw confirmed her worst expectations. 3 individuals in unmarked tactical gear were systematically dismantling the underground laboratory, carefully packaging equipment and specimens in specialized containers. Their methodical efficiency suggested professional training in evidence handling. These weren't common security guards, but specialists in crime scene remediation. Olivia documented their activities with her digital camera, using the maximum zoom to capture faces, equipment, and the vehicle partially visible at the side of the cabin. A nondescript van with government-style plates, but no agency markings. The systematic removal of evidence was being conducted with an attention to detail that would leave no trace of the laboratory's existence once completed. Her instinct was to intervene immediately, to confront these individuals and prevent the evidence destruction. But tactical reality tempered this impulse. They were armed professionals operating in a remote location where confrontation would place her at severe disadvantage. More importantly, direct intervention might compromise her ability to document their activities, evidence that could prove even more valuable than the compromised laboratory contents. Instead, Olivia continued comprehensive documentation, capturing time-stamped images of the evidence removal process, while noting specific specimens and equipment being taken. She recognized several of the sample containers as matching items Carson had described in his notes, critical links in the evidentiary chain connecting Northland to the contamination. As dawn fully broke, casting long shadows through the forest, the team's activities accelerated. They had nearly completed dismantling the underground facility, methodically erasing its existence while preserving selected items for what Olivia presumed would be controlled destruction elsewhere. She was preparing to retreat before daylight completely exposed her position when movement at the cabin entrance caught her attention. A 4th individual had arrived, someone in business casual attire rather than tactical gear, directing rather than participating in the physical work. When he turned toward her position, Olivia nearly gasped aloud. District Attorney William Prescott was personally overseeing the evidence removal operation. This was far beyond corporate security protecting their interests. This was active obstruction of justice by the county's chief law enforcement officer, the same official who would publicly minimize the situation at his press conference later. That morning, while assuring the community that proper investigative procedures were being followed, Olivia documented Prescott's presence with multiple photographs, capturing his interactions with the tactical team and his examination of specific evidence items. This was the smoking gun that transformed corporate environmental crime into governmental corruption. proof that official channels had been compromised at the highest local level. As she watched, Prescott checked his watch and made a call on his satellite phone, speaking briefly before directing the team to accelerate their work. They began loading the remaining containers into the unmarked van, clearly preparing for imminent departure. Olivia knew she had obtained the documentation needed to expose the corrupt operation, but something else caught her attention. A set of specimen containers Prescott had specifically examined and then set aside from the others being loaded. These containers bore the distinctive markings Carson had described in his notes as containing the most damning evidence. Water samples from residential areas showing clear chemical signatures matching Northland's industrial waste. The tactical team was focusing on equipment removal now, temporarily leaving these critical specimens unattended near the cabin entrance as they worked to dismantle larger items from the underground facility. Prescott had moved to the van, reviewing documentation on a tablet while occasionally directing the team's efforts. Olivia recognized a fleeting opportunity. If she could retrieve even one of those specimen containers, combined with her photographic evidence of the scene remediation, she would have irrefutable proof of both the environmental crimes and the cover-up operation. The risk was substantial. Any movement toward the cabin during daylight might expose her position to trained personnel, but the potential evidentiary value outweighed the danger, particularly given Ranger's and Carson's sacrifices. To bring this information to light, using natural cover and moving only when the team members were focused elsewhere, Olivia carefully made her way closer to the cabin. Prescott remained at the van, attention fixed on his tablet, while two team members carried equipment from the underground facility and the third secured items in the vehicle. When all three team members and Prescott were momentarily focused away from the cabin entrance, Olivia made her move. In one fluid motion, she darted from cover, grabbed two of the specimen containers, and retreated into the forest before anyone turned back toward the entrance. The entire action took less than 10 seconds, a testament to the fieldcraft she had developed during her years as a wilderness ranger. She quickly secured the specimens in her pack and continued moving away from the cabin, using natural terrain features to break line of sight while leaving minimal trace of her passage. Only when she had put sufficient distance between herself and the operation did Olivia pause to examine what she had obtained. The containers were professionally sealed and labeled with location coordinates, collection dates, and chemical testing markers. One contained water, the other soil, both from residential areas downstream from Northland's facility. These specimens, combined with her photographic evidence of Prescott personally overseeing the evidence removal, constituted the breakthrough Carson had risked his life to secure. They provided direct links between Northland's operations, the resulting contamination, and the governmental corruption facilitating the cover-up. More importantly, they represented redemption for Olivia's previous retreat from this same battle. Where she had once surrendered to intimidation, she had now reclaimed her purpose, not just as an environmental advocate, but as someone willing to risk personal safety in service to justice. As Olivia began the journey back toward town, navigating the forest with the quiet confidence of someone returning to their authentic path, she felt a sense of clarity that had eluded her for 5 years. The isolation she had chosen as protection had ultimately prepared her for this moment of decisive action. The evidence secured in her pack represented more than environmental contamination data. It embodied the principle that systems of power could be held accountable, that corporate influence had limits, that individual courage could overcome institutional corruption. Ranger had shown her this truth through his extraordinary determination to complete his mission despite devastating injuries. Carson had demonstrated it through his relentless pursuit of evidence despite official obstruction, and Dr. Abernathy had affirmed it through his continued research, even as powerful interests had worked to silence him. Now Olivia Reed, environmental lawyer turned wilderness ranger turned citizen investigator, had reclaimed her place in this lineage of determined truth-seekers. The path ahead remained dangerous, with powerful adversaries now directly implicated in criminal activity. But she had moved beyond her initial resistance to engagement, beyond the fear that had driven her retreat years earlier. The reluctant decision had been made. There would be no more running, no more hiding in the wilderness while injustice continued unchecked. Olivia Reed had recommitted to the fight she had once abandoned, armed not just with critical evidence, but with a profound understanding that purpose transcended fear. As the morning sun filtered through the forest canopy, illuminating her path back toward town and the challenges that awaited, Olivia felt the weight of the specimens in her pack, tangible reminders that sometimes justice required stepping beyond conventional boundaries, especially when those boundaries had been corrupted by the very powers they were designed to constrain. Dawn had broken fully by the time Olivia reached the forest boundary where wilderness met civilization. The park adjoining her hotel lay just ahead, its manicured landscape a stark contrast to the raw authenticity of the forest she was leaving behind. This physical transition mirrored her internal journey, moving from the isolation she had cultivated to the public confrontation that awaited. The evidence she carried represented a definitive crossing of personal and professional thresholds. By collecting these specimens outside official channels, she had stepped beyond her Forestry Service role into territory that might compromise her professional standing. Yet sometimes, legitimate justice required operating in the spaces between official boundaries, especially when those boundaries had been manipulated to obstruct truth. Olivia checked her watch. 7:42 a.m. Prescott's press conference was scheduled for 9:00 a.m., leaving her limited time to connect with Detective Hargrove before the district attorney publicly minimized the situation. The specimens needed proper documentation and secure storage if they were to maintain evidentiary value despite their unorthodox collection. Moving with purposeful stealth, she navigated through the public park, avoiding early morning joggers and dog walkers. Her forestry training had taught her that the best camouflage often came from projecting belonging rather than hiding, moving confidently as if her presence was expected rather than skulking suspiciously. She maintained a casual, hiking posture while following paths that offered maximum concealment from street view. The hotel's rear entrance required a key card, but service staff had propped it open while receiving morning deliveries. Olivia slipped inside unnoticed, taking service stairs rather than the more visible elevator. The corridor leading to her room appeared empty, but she approached cautiously, aware that the protective detail might still be stationed outside her door. When she rounded the final corner, she found the deputy's chair empty, an unexpected development that immediately raised concerns. The protective detail had explicit instructions to maintain constant surveillance. Their absence suggested either a shift change or more troubling possibilities. Olivia approached her door with heightened caution, listening carefully before using her keycard. The door opened to reveal Ranger standing alert despite his injuries, ears forward and body tense. The moment he recognized her, his posture relaxed slightly, but his attention immediately shifted to a point behind her. She turned to find Detective Hargrove rising from a chair in the corner of the room, expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Where the hell have you been?" Hargrove demanded in a harsh whisper. "Your protective detail reported you missing an hour ago. I convinced them not to sound a general alarm while I checked personally." "I apologize for the concern," Olivia replied, carefully setting down her backpack while maintaining eye contact with the detective. "But I needed to secure evidence before it disappeared." Hargrove's expression tightened. "Evidence from where, exactly?" The cabin. Northland's security team was there, dismantling the laboratory and removing everything that could connect the site to their operations. Olivia unzipped her pack, revealing the specimen containers. But they weren't alone. District Attorney Prescott was personally supervising the operation. The detective's professionally neutral expression cracked. Momentarily, genuine shock breaking through before she regained composure. "That's a serious accusation, Reed." "Not an accusation. Documented fact." Olivia removed her camera, displaying the time-stamped images showing Prescott directing the evidence removal operation. The county's chief law enforcement officer actively participated in destroying evidence in an attempted murder investigation. Hargrove reviewed the images in silence, her experienced investigator's eye assessing their content and implications. When she looked up, her expression had hardened with the cold anger of someone who took professional integrity as a personal code. "This changes everything," she stated. "If Prescott is compromised, we can't trust standard protocols. Any evidence flowing through official channels could be altered or disappeared." "Exactly why I acted independently," Olivia explained. "Carson's notes suggested widespread corruption connected to Northland's influence. The district attorney's direct involvement confirms the system itself is compromised." Ranger had moved to stand beside Olivia, his presence a physical affirmation of her actions. Despite his injuries, the K9 maintained an alert posture that suggested renewed purpose rather than diminished capability. "He doesn't look like he got much rest," Hargrove observed, nodding toward Ranger. "He was agitated after I left," Olivia acknowledged. "I'd hoped he would sleep, but his sense of duty apparently extends to providing security in my absence." "Dogs like him don't compartmentalize missions," Hargrove said. "The assignment remains active until completed, regardless of physical condition." She gestured toward the specimens. "Those need proper handling if they're going to have any legal value despite their collection circumstances." "I've maintained documentation of the chain of custody since collection," Olivia assured her. "Time-stamped photographs establishing their location at the cabin site, continuous possession during transport, and witnesses to their condition upon arrival." Hargrove nodded approval. "Good. But we need more than procedural correctness. We need protection outside the compromise system." She checked her watch. "Prescott's press conference is in just over an hour. Once he publicly establishes the official narrative, contradicting it becomes exponentially more difficult." The detective's phone rang, interrupting their planning. She answered, her expression growing increasingly serious as she listened. "When?" she asked, then, "Condition?" And finally, "Secure the scene. I'm on my way." She ended the call, meeting Olivia's questioning gaze with grim confirmation. "Carson's house was broken into 30 minutes ago. The deputy posted outside. Was attacked. He's alive but unconscious. Initial assessment suggests the perpetrators targeted Carson's research materials. They're eliminating all evidence trails," Olivia concluded. "The cabin, Carson's home, they're systematically removing everything that connects Northland to the contamination. Which means these specimens and your photographic evidence are now the only remaining documentation," Hargrove noted, gesturing to Olivia's pack. "We need to get them somewhere secure immediately." Ranger suddenly tensed, his attention fixing on the hotel room door seconds before a soft knock sounded. Hargrove immediately drew her weapon, positioning herself strategically while motioning Olivia to move out of the potential line of fire. "Detective Hargrove," a voice called quietly from the hallway. "It's Deputy Chen. We have a situation." Hargrove approached the door cautiously. "Identify with confirmation code." "Echo 7 Tango," the deputy responded with the appropriate security protocol. After verifying through the peephole, Hargrove opened the door to reveal a young deputy whose worried expression suggested urgent developments. "District Attorney Prescott has ordered Carson transferred to County Memorial Hospital, Deputy Chen reported. Claims the regional medical center lacks appropriate security for a criminal investigation subject. Carson isn't a subject, he's a victim and witness, Hargrove countered sharply. Yes, ma'am, but the DA's office issued the transfer order directly to hospital administration, bypassing department channels. The transport team is preparing to move him within the hour. Olivia and Hargrove exchanged alarmed glances, both recognizing the implications. County Memorial Hospital was directly affiliated with local government, with security and staff that reported through channels Prescott potentially influenced. Moving Carson there would place him under the district attorney's effective control. This is about separating Carson from his K-9 partner, Olivia realized aloud. County Memorial has strict policies against service animals. They've previously denied access even to certified therapy dogs. Ranger's reaction to this observation was immediate, a low growl that conveyed understanding and opposition to the described separation. And more importantly, it places Carson in an environment where evidence collection and witness statements can be controlled, Hargrove added. If he regains consciousness, his testimony about the attack would be obtained. By personnel reporting to Prescott, Deputy Chen shifted uncomfortably. The transfer order appears legitimate, Detective, signed by Judge Westbrook with medical necessity citations. Westbrook, Hargrove repeated, her tone suggesting recognition of another compromised official. Carson's notebook mentioned his concerns about the judge's financial connections to Northland subsidiaries. Olivia mentally processed the expanding web of corruption while assessing their diminishing options. With the district attorney and judiciary potentially compromised, standard legal recourse presented significant risks. Direct opposition to the transfer order would require openly challenging the authority of multiple officials without sufficient evidence to justify such opposition. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.